Good morning to you, buddy.
Good morning.
What's happening in New Jersey?
Oh man, everything is quiet on this end. Everything's nice. The weather's nice. Not as brisk as it's been. People are social distancing. And
Happy New Year, man.
Happy New Year to you. Happy New Year to you. I'm seeming to be having some video problems here. What's going on with my?
Well, I see you. I don't know whether you can see me. We got
I can see you, but we got Jed Moore up there. Yeah.
yeah,
Okay.
but I got well, I can stop the share here for a second here, so we can. I think.
Oh, there you go. I see me now.
Yeah.
Okay, got you. Quick.
Well, it's just if you share a video,
Mhm.
then I think it overtakes something else. Good morning, Carl.
Good morning.
How you
Good
doing
morning,
today?
Carl. How are you, Carl?
I'm doing all right.
Good, man. Happy New Year to you.
Yes, thank you.
Yeah. So
My dog was a little upset last night with all the gunshots and firecrackers and whatnot, but
right.
it wasn't too bad.
Nah,
Yeah,
nah,
our dog. Well, I don't know. She barks at the deer
My
first. That
my,
marks our
mine guard
neighborhood.
mine guards us against evil killer cats.
Yeah, right.
He kind of just stares at the deer. He doesn't quite know what to make of them.
Well, we have a neighbor that feeds the deer. They're not supposed to, but they do.
Yeah,
Um, and so there's a herd of them. I mean, no one's outside much anymore. I mean, so there's a herd of them that just wanders from the Harpers Ferry National Park, which is behind our home a little bit. And there's about 10 of them, all ages. Um,
that's what we
family
got.
comes in for a feast.
Yeah.
And my dog comments on each one of them, so.
Anyway, I love the deer. It's one of the favorite things about living around here. You got deer in your backyard, or you take your dog for a walk, and there'll be four of them standing on the road. They'll look at you and then gracefully climb a mountain in a way you could never imagine how they do it.
mm.
They're
They
just
turn and wave goodbye.
there's a they're a thing of beauty. I couldn't.
Yeah, I tell you.
I understand. My family were all hunters, and my mother bragged about how she got her first deer and all this and that, but
Hmm.
I couldn't shoot them. I mean, maybe if I was starving, I could, but
Yeah. Hey, it's
all
Ted.
right.
Good morning, Ted. How you doing this morning?
Hey, how's everybody?
Hey, Ted,
We're
how are
doing
you?
fine.
Yeah, we're doing good, man.
Happy
So,
New
Well,
Year.
yep. Welcome to
New Year, yeah.
2021.
Yep. Happy New Year to you, bro.
But we can say, I don't think anyone's gonna, hearken to relive the last year. So, can I go back to last January? No.
No.
The reset button.
Yeah.
Mhm.
I posted something last night. It goes 2020. Let's be done and get on with 2021.
There you go.
Oh, something to that effect.
That's
But
right.
it humored me when I said I felt this transition last night around midnight. When I posted
Right.
that, it was like, oh man.
You felt
I
the
mean, it was
affirmation.
kind of
Yes.
surreal. Yeah, my body just moved into 2021. So I'm really interested in what today's show is going to bring.
Anyone
I
gonna
saw one
take
that
a
said
wager on whether?
hindsight is 2020, but we don't want to go there again. So.
Anyone want to
So
take a wager on whether Trump will show up at the January
The
20th
inauguration. I
inauguration?
don't think he will, but I think that what he's going to encourage some street fighting on
Yeah.
January 6th.
it,
There's going to be a brawl in D.C.
mm,
Proud Boys have got their hotel
Right.
staked out and filled up, and uh,
If I was that hotel, I'd contact my insurance company.
that you better believe it. Anyway, I think they're going to go out. They're not going to go out peacefully.
No.
Let's put it that way. I don't think they can win, in the streets of D.C. because what is D.C. 90% black? and they're not going to find too many friends even among the DC police force.
No, and the mayor is dead set against him. So
the mayor's a big Black Lives Matter woman. So
Muriel Bowser, right? She didn't seem like she's been called kind of radical, but she didn't seem that way when she was running. I got a friend. We both have a friend, Carl. David Schwartzman, right?
Yeah.
Mm-hmm. So who was, he wasn't much enthusiastic, but
well, he's been with the Free DC Green Party. The Free DC people and the Green Party people merged, so they're really the second party, and the Democrats are first, and then the Free DC Greens are the second party, and then the Republicans are distant third in the district. Right. He did pretty good. He got about 18,000, 20,000 votes when he ran.
Yeah, that was what?
A couple of years back,
right?
Yeah. He's but his real value is that he's really a scientist, and he knows a hell of a lot about climate change and solar energy and stuff like that. I knew his brother a long time before I knew him. Actually, he was going to school in Maine, and he had a PhD in physics. Right.
And him and his wife lived about 10 miles from us. And
he wrote it didn't get published in the United States. It got published in a journal called International Critical Thought, which is put out in Beijing. Half of the editors are Chinese, and the other half are everybody else in the world. One of my friends here, Jerry Harris, is on the editorial board, and David Schweikert. But David wrote this paper called Solar Communism, and they published it. It was a good theoretical argument. His argument was that, we could make the transition to solar energy by 2050, at least 95%. You're always going to have a certain amount of jet fuel and stuff like that you're going to have to burn, but he makes a very good case for it.
But he's been writing for years on that. There's a number,
Yeah, he's got a couple books out.
He came on our program once, JB, and I don't know. He's
a hard guy to interview because he bounces all over the place.
I know.
He talks. He just lets his ideas pop out. He doesn't think too much about who his audience might be, whether they understand what he's talking about or not.
But I don't know. I had a drink with him about 5 years ago in a DC bar, and we were debating, discussing, whatever, and we had about 5 or 6 tables around us that were ready to pull up and take part.
Right? No, like I say, he's a smart guy, and he's usually right.
Anyway,
I'm a smart guy, and I'm wrong lots of times.
Hey, JB, are you there? Are you actually there, or are you just putting your backdrop up? Are you getting his coffee right now? We've got a couple of minutes here. Well, it's a slow start. By the way, I sent an invite to Dean Baker, earlier in the week, but I think he's on vacation, actually. So I got a vacation email back from him, so I doubt he's going to. But I'm going to volunteer to summarize his a piece that he wrote for the end of the year, because I think it's a good introduction to a political economy discussion for 2021, and and I say that without being completely concurring with. Everything that he has to say, but I think he lays it out in a pretty non-dogmatic way in which we can talk about practical as well as possible theoretical aspects of what he's saying. So as soon as let's give a couple more minutes to get people. Who else is going to?
Yeah, you're only at 8. You're only at 8:57 here.
I know, man. I got wait a few minutes. What'd you do for New Year's Eve, Ted? Did you go out and
John, we were up all
Destroys
night. We had about 50 people over at our place. No, I'm just kidding. I went to bed before 11. How about that? We usually always have a like a pre, because we have 2 kids, so we always have like the pre-party for everybody. Our party ends at 10. We usually have a party from 7 to 10 every year, but nothing much this year. But yeah, I was gonna say too that Dean lives in Utah, so it's 6 a.m. where he is.
Yeah. I know. That's true. That's
Yeah,
true.
if you ever want me to reach, we're pretty good friends. So if you want me to reach out,
Well, maybe you could try to. I sent him an email. I mean, I only met him. I met him like 5 years ago at a AEA, American Economics Association convention that I went to with my wife because she's, was on a panel, doing something, and we had dinner. We had dinner
Yeah.
with him.
I brought him to West Virginia like 10 years ago. I had him testify at the legislature.
Oh yeah. Well, he does. I mean, he's got a good rep. He stays away from making claims that later proved to be exaggerated too. And but he's a great data guy too. Really.
Well, he sees things a little differently too. I think that's what makes Dean unique. He sort of sees that pre-tax stuff, looking at the bloated salaries of doctors, lawyers. He sees all the rent seeking. He basically turns neoclassical economics on its head sometimes by like pointing out the contradictions in their own thoughts, which I always thought was probably the most value added thing that he did or does, still does. It's fun to, he made a good argument in his book Rigged about, or the one before that, about how right to work is nothing. There's nothing free market about right to work. You're violating a contract between 2 private entities, a person and a company. He does a good job of sort of calling out the contradictions between some of these so-called free market policies. To me, that's been a huge contribution to the discussion.
I operate on the rules of thumb that, number 1, there's no such thing as an entirely free market, and number 2, there's no such thing as a fully planned economy. Once you got those in your head, then you can.
Well, I think Dean is a Polanyi guy all the way. I mean, that's why I said so-called free market. Dean's done a good job. I hate when progressives say free market. I'm like market, government creates the market. There is no market within government.
Exactly.
That's what Polanyi said, 80 years ago.
Right. It's a market is a three-legged stool: a buyer, a seller, and a cop.
I think they start out as forts, don't they?
Right.
Someone creates a fort, that happens to be a crossroads, and you have a time in which certain things can be bought and sold, traded.
There's a great book by Louis L'Amour, who writes, he writes all these pulp westerns, but he wrote one book that wasn't a pulp western, and it's called The Walking Drum, and it takes place in medieval Europe around the year 1100, and it's about this young kid who joins a caravan. At the head of the caravan, he bangs a drum to let people know that the caravan full of goods is coming, and it's led by a few soldiers, and they were the corpus. That's where the word corporation comes from. Company. That's where the word company comes from. And drummer for a salesman is where a salesman comes from. And he basically gives you, in this historical fiction account, and Louis L'Amour is always very accurate about it, about how capitalism developed starting around the year 1100, and where the beginning of it was markets. And that it's important to understand the market is an achievement of human civilization. They existed before capitalism, and they're going to exist after capitalism. When you didn't have markets, you had pillage and theft and plunder. I mean, you still have some of that under capitalism, but before markets, that's all it was. That's how exchange happened. But so markets are an achievement, and they will be around after capitalism for a good while too. They're a function of scarcity.
We got Larry. Good morning, Larry. Risen from the dead here. we make jokes about Larry just because, sometimes. But anyway, good morning, Larry. You're back to work, I hear.
Probably the last week in January.
Right.
because I have to get a booster.
And my good buddy Scott Marshall, who's good morning, Scott. You're in a
Hey, good
different,
morning, everybody.
you didn't bring the whole crowd with you yet this morning. That's usually your background.
Well, the problem is I'm up here in Land O'Lakes, Wisconsin,
Yeah.
and they wouldn't come up here. They thought it was too cold and snowy. We're all a bunch of chickens.
All right. Well, Happy New Year, buddy.
Happy New Year, guys.
Why don't we get started here? We may have here's Randy. He's coming. He's here. Okay. Hey, JB, are you there? I don't know what JB's doing.
Yeah, I'm here.
Can I make you co-host so that can I do that?
Yeah.
So if you see anybody that I don't, coming in, anyway, okay. I basically on Ted's suggestion from a couple weeks ago, I kept thinking about inviting Dean Baker on, and because I follow him a lot, and I post a lot of his stuff on socialist economics pages and circulation, and he does a weekly what do you call it, beat the press piece where he has a great time, a lot of fun correcting what happens in the major media, especially the New York Times and other major publications on economic policy and on economics. But he has posted a year-end review. I think he's done this before, actually. Hold on a second. Yeah. Oh, okay. I had to interrupt. The dog is an issue here right now. Hold on. Okay. Anyway, and so I thought that would be a good one to summarize his argument. I sent an invite to him, but I think he's on vacation. We were talking before. Ted knows him, and maybe we can get him on later. But I thought it was worthwhile to start out the new year with summarizing his argument, which will take me about 5 minutes to do. And I'm going to not interject, my own view on his remarks until later. But I think it's as good a introduction to thinking about inequality and its remedies at the core of many problems and many issues as we hit 2021. So let me do that here. It'll take me about 5 minutes. His first point is that he's looking at a way to do something about inequality by reducing the amount of before tax income that goes to those at the top of the income distribution. And this is a little bit different than many progressives who tend to focus almost entirely on changing the tax laws around get more progressive taxation to be able to tax the wealth at the top of the distribution rather than focusing as much on pre-tax. And Dean has in my view, he has a pretty powerful argument here. I'm going to read some excerpts here from his piece that I think say the major points without comment. My focus on reducing income at the top doesn't mean for a second that I don't see efforts at raising income for those at the bottom and middle as being important. I have long been involved or associated working alongside people to raise minimum wages, protect or increase Social Security benefits, and increase unionization rates. By the way, Dean's think tank that he and another fella founded gets substantial funding from the labor movement and some other places too. And he's always been before he was at CEPR, he was also at EPI, and which is also a heavily labor-funded research institute. Anyway, these are very important efforts. In other words, the ones I just mentioned. But at the end of the day, our ability to raise incomes at the middle and bottom will depend upon reducing incomes at the top. And this is the great thing about Dean Baker, which is not true of all, even progressive economists. He does not run away from the fact that from the class nature of the problem facing us. This gets to the old pie cutting story. If we want those at the middle and bottom to have a much bigger slices of the pie, the folks at the top will have to get by with smaller slices. And we'll get to a minute to the counter argument of that, which is that, why can't you just grow the whole pie? Anyway, to see how skewed, however, the pie eating has become, if the federal minimum wage had kept pace with productivity growth since 1968, as it did from its establishment in 1938 until 1968, it would be $24 per hour today. That means a full-time minimum wage earner would have an income of $48,000 a year. A two-earner couple getting the minimum wage would have an income of $96,000 a year. However, we can, and so going back now, the typical argument that's raised is that, well, the best way to fix this is to just expand the pie, grow the economy, and make everybody a winner. We can talk about expanding the pie, but Dean says, I don't think that I or anyone else has a magical formula to hugely expand the size of the pie, like, for example, China did for the past 25 years. There are areas where better policy can lead to more productive economy, but we are likely to be talking about 1 to 2% increases in the reductions in the inequality, rather than the 10 to 20% that are actually would get us to a equitable place. And even these gains are likely to be a long-term story, not gains we can see in 2 or 3 years. Many on the left want to use taxes to reduce the income, and therefore consumption at the top. While we can and should make our tax system more progressive, there are real limits to how far we can push progressive taxation. Rich people don't like to pay taxes. They can and do find ways to avoid and evade taxes that are passed. Insofar as they are successful in these efforts, we fail to reduce their income in the way intended. We create a huge tax gaming industry, which is a source of economic waste in itself, a generator of inequality, and we undermine faith in the system. It's better if we change economic structures in ways that don't allow people to get rich in the first place. As a political matter, it's hard to defend an institutional structure that is both inefficient and a large generator of inequality. As a practical matter, it's much easier to design systems that don't give rich people billions of dollars in the first place than to try and impose taxes that pull most of their billions back after the fact. And then he surveys a couple of the big examples of this. One in which is the corruption of patent and copyright monopolies. This is a long-standing issue of that Dean has been pushing. But it does highlight, the property-oriented nature of the distribution. For example, we see the biggest abuses and biggest examples of this kind of abuse in the drug industry. And it's a big driver of wealth to the top of the income distribution. Second, we have the issues of corruption of corporate governance. And this is a situation in which the CEOs of the United States make 20% or more, well, sometimes double those of their European and counterparts, for example. And it has completely skewed the income distribution at the top level of salaries. We're not talking about returns to capital now, but salaries, which is as big a part of the inequality situation as the actual growth of capital. So he says that a a popular story among is that we can't have good paying factory jobs that support a family because of globalization. The deal is that workers earning $30 an hour plus benefits can't compete with workers in places like Mexico and China who can do the same work for less than 1/10 as much. This is true, but the fact that our factory workers were put in direct competition with low paid workers in the developing world was not just something that happened, it was the result of deliberate policy. Our trade deals were designed to make it as easy as possible for U.S. corporations to outsource work to developing countries and bring manufactured goods back into the United States. The massive loss of manufacturing jobs in the years from 2000 to 2007, before the Great Recession, was not an accident. That was the point of our trade deals. The financial sector itself. The financial sector is the source of many of the country's great fortunes, but it's also a source of enormous waste. And he's long advocated a transaction tax that would be an effective reform. But fundamentally, the reform would be, in his view, reducing the size of the financial sector overall as being not necessary. And he has some details on that in the argument that I recommend that you read. And then lastly, he deals with the social networking, gigantic things, the Facebook and social media. And in there, he proposes fundamentally that the issue of monopolization be addressed by treating Facebook the same as a regular press. In other words, everything you post on Facebook is liable for, equivalently to whatever the New York Times posts they are supposedly liable for. Now, he has some other arguments, but in each case, okay, he's talking about ways to attack both corruption, corporate governance, the policies negotiated in trade agreements, and the size of the financial sector, and the role of patent and copyright monopolies as the structural ways in which he would address, primary areas in which he would address the economic inequality questions before taxation. Now, I'm going to stop there. I just want to point out in my own view that one point, the most important line of the whole thing is that because of the slow rates of growth under any really imaginable stimulus program, it's not possible to do something about inequality without reducing what's being taken by the rich. The win-win proposition has been blown away. I think that's probably the most important part of his argument. I'm going to stop there and open the floor for other points of view or people who have better knowledge of teen stuff than I do. Anyway, and who wants to go first?
Well, I'll venture something.
Actually, Tina beat you by raising.
Oh, okay. Well, I'll let Tina go.
Tina, go ahead.
Yeah, I was going to say that I think that it's really good to have these kind of concrete proposal issues, especially reform issues like this, because as I read this, and I would like to take time and read it more deeply because I think it could be useful to me. So I travel politically in several different cohorts. So I got my working class, like lower working class, not college educated people like me who I work with pretty closely right here in Beaver County. But then now I also reach into Pittsburgh and I reach into the suburbs because our congressional district was changed. So I have this cohort now of people who are actually listening to my political stuff pretty closely, but they're like, middle class, upper middle class. And if I can, so part of the thing for me is to like to keep them engaged so they don't hurt us. Like, because left to their own devices, they will get up to like anti-welfare stuff sometimes, anti-tax stuff like that. So if I can like send them concrete reform proposals like this that they can get involved in and get their minds around, then I can keep that unity in the coalition that we're trying to form to win. So while I work on Medicare for all, and I think it's really interesting, his point about doctors, I think is really interesting, because in that group, like I do get pushback about Medicare for all because they travel, they know doctors. Like I don't know doctors. So like I talk to people about Medicare for all and they're like, yeah, like hell yeah, we need Medicare. We need, so I think it was a really good article, and I'd like to thank you for putting that up there. It was helpful to me.
Next, Carl.
I think that one way I look at it is inequality in itself is not the key problem. Take China as a good example. China's got a higher inequality than the United States right at the moment. The spread between its billionaire class and everybody else it's a higher degree. But the difference is that they've made great efforts to raise the bottom 400 million brought out of dire poverty, and now they're wrapping it up, and the working classes wages have risen by 10 times over in the midst of this growing inequality. So the government, even though this vast inequality and the people can be cynical about it, the government still enjoys vast amount of popular support because of the fact that the government has seen fit to focus on this kind of radical structural transformation of the economy. So the lesson to that for me is that to get at the heart of what's happened in the last 40 years, I think the key word is that I'm into these days is what I call high road green manufacturing. That's the sector of the economy that has to be grown. Manufacturing, because it's the source of new wealth and it has a ripple effect in creating new jobs. High road in the sense that the old smokestack manufacturing of the past is over. What we're interested in is high skilled advanced manufacturing that's needed for an advanced economy that's partly robotic and so on, but it still requires manufacturing skills and a growth of the manufacturing sector. And green in the sense that it's part of building the infrastructure of the Green New Deal so that by 2050 we can stop burning 95% of our carbon. And that means building the smart grid, which in and of itself is probably the biggest. You combine the pyramids and the Great Wall of China together, and you'll have the smart grid is on that scale in terms of creating the infrastructure for green jobs at all levels, at the lower level, middle level, and the skilled level. So to me, that's the challenge, the economic challenge at the heart. It's not so much a matter of just dragging down wealth from the top and redistributing it to the bottom. It's more about structural change so that the power gets rearranged. Part of that means a much more, let's get unionization back up to 30 or even 40%. That's absolutely crucial. And that could be done by passing the EFCA. And, also at the same time to create and encourage a formation and creation of worker-owned cooperatives as new businesses in this advanced manufacturing sector. So, because there's a way that the workers in those co-ops, they don't get a wage and they don't get a salary. They get a check once a month, but their check is a draw on their anticipated profits for the year. So they're no longer proletarians in that sense, even though they still operate in a market economy. So those are the kind of structural reforms I think that has to be at the heart of any kind of, dealing with the inequality in this country and the flatlining of American wages and the deterioration of the I hate to talk about the middle class, why in the world could we start at the middle? To me, the key thing is to start where the need is greatest, raise up the bottom sector of the working class, and then along with it, the middle sector of the working class, and get rid of this middle class obfuscation nonsense.
I'd like to say something.
It's James, then
Yeah.
Scott.
Okay, yeah. Good morning, everybody. Happy New Year.
Ted
very
had
interesting.
his hand raised.
Oh, okay. Well,
okay, go ahead.
Put Ted in line too. Okay.
Yes, go ahead. Ted, you can go first. I yield my.
Go ahead,
time.
James. You got a thought in your head.
James.
Go ahead.
No, I was just going to ask a question about the article and the conversation, and kind of condense it to Jefferson and Berkeley County. What do you guys see as the power balance in those two counties, and how can we begin to level it out? I mean, I know there's just economic starvation going on there that's blatant. What are we going to do about that?
Let's add that to the mix here. Okay. Scott, and then Ted, then Randy. You're muted, Scott.
You hear me now?
Yeah, go ahead.
Okay. I actually wish I was back in Chicago because I have a poster that I want to show. And the poster says, "Workers of the World Unite, backed by popular demand." And I think that's kind of a critical question that we're talking about right here. There is a huge move globally for Workers of the World Unite. I don't know how many of you are familiar with the union federation called Industrial, but Industrial is an international federation of labor that has unions affiliated all around the globe. And a huge part of what they're talking about is how to do away with what you were talking about, the advantage of using slave labor and around the world to equalize manufacturing and all those things in terms of wages and stuff like that. And they do make progress. They're not just advocating it. They are making progress, and the green stuff is a part of it. Inequality is a part of it. The struggle against male supremacy, racism, all of that stuff is actually a part of that discussion and program for Workers of the World. So I do think that is something that I know in the steelworkers is affiliated with it, and we have sent people around the world to different conferences about it and situations like that. It's a growing movement, and I think it needs the support of the left and everybody and all progressives around the world. So anyway, I just wanted to throw that into the mix because I think that kind of equality is certainly a big part of what we're talking about. That's it.
Ted.
Yeah, I was just going to say, I think the one thing Dean brings that's really unique is really looking at that pre-distribution where other groups aren't concerned so much with that. I've followed his work for about 12 years, and I think I read The Nanny State and Full Employment with Jared Burns too. But we actually had Dean come to Charleston to speak about Nanny State about 12 years ago, and he spoke at the West Virginia legislature, which was a lot of fun. But one thing that I think is really good in thinking about, I do think it's a zero-sum game in some ways. Rising tide can't lift all boats anymore. Obviously, that hasn't happened in the last 45 years. And I think that inequality is very real and is at the heart of most of all of our problems. But I think his unique thing is really challenging and turning neoclassical liberalism on its head. whether it's patents or copyrights. I mean, even looking at tort damages, showing that there's nothing free market about, limiting tort damages, that let courts have it out. Like Dean did a very good job looking at bankruptcy laws as a big handout. Just really going under that rent-seeking activity that's happening in our economy. And if, as JB knows, if you've been at the legislature in West Virginia, all it is a big rent-seeking festival of corporations coming in there, asking government for money. Why can't we get vaccinations out? Well, we won't hire public workers. We like to make sure that all the money goes to private industries like Optimum and other groups. They run our Medicaid program in West Virginia. MCO runs our CHIP program. I mean, this whole privatization of all of these services is the reason we don't have a functioning world anymore. This neoliberalism has just been baked into our entire structure. I think Dean does a great job of sort of uplifting that. The one thing I was going to ask him if he was on was, one thing I've been thinking about is as we approach inequality, we can look at raising the minimum wage, we can look at other programs. But one thing we should all be trying to do is how do we lower the costs for working people? How do we increase people's disposable incomes? And I think Dean looks at that, looking at doctors, comparing that to other countries, that we pay doctors too much, we pay lawyers. If you go to Norway and buy a house, you don't need a lawyer to make sure that happens. I mean, it's like there's all this rent seeking just all throughout our entire economy. And I think Dean just does a great job of lifting that out and showing how there's nothing free market, quote unquote, about that. But I think looking at other ways to reduce expenses like public banks, broadband, like I look in Morgantown, they pay about a fourth of the cost for water than we do in Charleston because we have a privatized system. I look at broadband's another issue. If you live in Hardy County, if you have HardyNet, you pay a hell of a lot less than I do for Suddenlink. I mean, I think thinking a little bit more broadly too about utilities, thinking about social housing or public pensions. There's no reason states can't, have a public pension option maybe at some point. But I think that is the real interesting thing. I agree with Dean completely about the pie, but I think at some level, the movement has to embrace middle-class tax increases. And I think that's what Dean is sort of tacitly saying too, is like, even if you get money all from the top and redistribute, it's not gonna quite be enough. You're gonna have to think about, to fund a really well-functioning society, you're gonna have to do that. And one way that I always try to write an op-ed about this was when you look at your healthcare premiums, there's no difference between paying a healthcare premium and paying a tax. One's just going to a private insurance company. The other one's, what's the difference? Difference is you pay a hell of a lot more. We always talk about Medicare for All being the biggest tax cut that anybody would ever get in the middle class, and especially people that are struggling to make ends meet. So I think he's done a really good job. I think the one thing I would always ask, and I think James may be talking about this too, it's really hard in a state like West Virginia that we have the lowest per capita millionaires. I think we're 49th. And we have the smallest share of income filers over 250 in the entire country. So what do you do with that? And how do you rearrange an economy where even if you redistribute from above, you can't even begin to address the issues? And I think looking at things like mandating vacation days, shorter work weeks, looking at some of these public provisions, and also just getting the rent seeking out of the economy too, locally is a good way to, do that. Quit privatizing services. It just increases the cost for everybody else.
Next was Randy.
Well, my reaction is, it seems like Dean is an Elizabeth Warren economist. And, he's been more, I think he's been more to the left in the past. And now he's looking at ways to kind of trim the inequality. Yeah, of course, if you don't have an expanding economy, you're not going to have income growth. However, you can have an expanding economy without income growth at the bottom. So, the argument against an expanding economy, I don't think is very sound, because as Carl has laid out, there is room for expansion of this economy. There's great, great unfulfilled potential in the U.S. economy, and we know it's because of the flow of capital to the top and the export of the manufacturing base to low wage countries. And but you know how we do that, I think is more theory, because you know there's not going to be any kind of revolutionary change in how capital is distributed in the United States for a long time to come. So you know, I think his proposals are kind of you know, nibbling at the edges of the problem. And you know, I agree with Tina. You know, if there are people who really like that, we want them on our side. You know, but how do you really change? Well, you know, I think Ted's idea of reducing the work week, that is a concrete reduction, you know, in the distribution of the proceeds from labor power. And you know, I mean, that was probably the biggest movement we've ever seen, other than the organizing of the CIO. And you know, to me, the 8-hour day movement is a model for where we need to go. But now I didn't read the document, but you know, the discussion of the corruption, I don't think really gets. I don't think that's going to have a big effect, you know, on the distribution of the proceeds of workers' labor power. So you know, I just wanted to throw those out there. But that, you know, Elizabeth Warren, economist, was like the first feeling, you know, that I had, and you know, I like Elizabeth Warren, so you know, I'll leave it at that. Thanks.
Who is next? Anybody else wants to speak? Larry, you're muted.
Yeah, the
No,
things
go ahead.
I'm noticing in the extension, I think Ted did a great job at covering what could happen, you know, as a state worker with some seniority. I get, I think, 12 hours vacation a month, and there's 14 holidays, flexibility in my schedule. These things really, really add to the value of my job. They mean a lot. Not a little, they make a difference. And I'm thinking about so many things, like the crash of 2008. It's because of CDOs, you know, collateralized debt obligations. Now they're finding, I read an article by Frank Hartray in the Atlantic about, now the banks are at it again. They're doing the same thing, only they're doing it to small business loans, extending their credit out further than is reasonable or safe. We could have another crash if we don't come up with something better than Dodd-Frank Control Act. Then I'm thinking the comparisons to China are all really good and valid. And they have something to do with the transfer of corporate power from manufacturing to the financial departments of General Motors and all these. So the financiers are the ones controlling things when it should be the people making the product have something to do with it. And what I wanted to say about the comparison to China is we should also include comparison to Germany, who has a very, very strong labor portion of all of it. It has to be labor on the board of any corporation over there. So there's so much. There's just so much. You know, I was reading that Bob Cratchit, Charles Dickens,
Right.
made 15 shillings a week. He made more than a minimum wage worker now. Bob Cratchit, the icon of poverty, in a holiday spirit. Really, these are the things that come to my mind when I hear this. That's really all I have. It's just a lot to do, and the main thing is the messaging. And I also agree very much, Carl, that if the more you empower the middle class, the more they'll suppress the lower class. They're not any different than the upper class in that respect. They're interested in their own financial, not only well-being, but prospering. And I agree. You should start at the bottom and not pick a certain segment of the population. Every time you do that, you turn them against the rest of the population. That messaging, hard to get through. Another thing Ted said was how embedded this is in our culture and structure of our government. We're talking about a very, very difficult trek. I can't imagine being in the State House now. That must be a hard slug every day. Anyway, that's really all I have.
Let me ask a couple of questions. Go ahead, Scott, first. Yeah, you're
Mute.
Yeah, unmute. Yeah.
Have to remember all these symbols. I just wanted to say that, one of the basics, and it's not going to surprise people that I'm a Marxist, one of the basic things is time, place, and circumstance. And I think we have to look at the struggle today from the point of view of the rising tide of struggle that's going on in this country. The labor movement is mobilized in a way that I don't think any of us have ever seen in our lifetime, because we weren't around. Most of us weren't around when the CIA was born and all of that. No, it's really incredible, and the demands of the labor movement are incredibly advanced, and the coalitions that the labor movement is building at this time with all of the struggles against racism, with the struggles against male supremacy, with the struggles in terms of immigrants and all of those coalitions, the most powerful coalitions we've seen in our lifetime, are being built right now. And I think that one of the things that is incumbent upon all of us incredibly is to be embedded in that struggle and to be putting our 2 cents worth into to how people are changing. Because I'll tell you, from my experience in the steelworkers, these people are changing, and I think I've even mentioned this before. 2 of us who are members of the Communist Party were appointed to the top leadership positions of we were elected to the top leadership positions of the steelworker retirees. And we have open reds in leaderships of local unions and stuff like that. It's just an incredible time. And I think we have to be concentrated on making that work and being embedded in that, because that, I think, is the key to changing all of this. That's it.
Let me ask. I was going to ask a couple more questions. Mike's in. Hi. Good morning, Mike.
Hi. Good morning and Happy New Year, everyone.
Happy New Year.
Hey, Mike.
Well, I had a couple of thoughts about Dean's article. The thing I liked about first of it is that there's no avoiding the class struggle. You're not going to get away from it, and the numbers he sets up prove that. And if I was had any doubt, I would come to the same conclusion after listening to Ted's excellent, better than I did summary of those views, is that you need a different class and power to implement this. And now, so that's not, and then I also object. I don't actually agree with the idea that globalization was just a matter of subjective choices. Sure, but choices are made under the influence of necessity and interest. And so it's not entirely accurate to say that it's just oh, well, we could have voted to do something radically different. Well, another class of society might have voted to do something radically different, but the ones that are in running the institutions now, especially the corporate ones and the financial ones, no. They're going to have to be defeated. I mean, I remember lots of, and the other essence of it that rang so true is that I negotiated or helped negotiate probably about, I don't know, 60 contracts when I worked for the UE. And, you know, it's true that every time you put the screws to the company, if you had the ability to do so, they would start, you could see them, you know, start calculating in their mind. Okay, well, if we concede to the union's demand, how are we going to pay for it? How are we going to pay for it? How are we going to pay for it? And can we expand the business enough to cover it? Can we introduce a new technology that will, keep the the productivity, at the rate that we want it, or at the rate that's equivalent to our competitor? As we guess it. So, but nevertheless, it always was, whatever we get in our pocket's going to come out of yours, and whatever you take's going to come out of ours. That was at the nub of every contract negotiation. Okay, so you can't, and in politics we like to deny it, but it's true there too. And I think now the other issue is that I wanted to raise. It raises a revolutionary kind of question in the sense that when you talk about structural change, it's not just a rational debating society. It's one set of interests has to prevail over another. Otherwise, the majority, the movement never comes together, and that happens through action and conflict and engagement. I agree with what Scott said. And in terms of globalization, it cannot happen without international labor cooperation. It just can't. Okay, I mean, unless somebody in some country starts a massive rebellion against the effects of the low wage thing, well, nothing's going to happen. All right. So, and I raise that point because when we define what is revolutionary and what is reform, okay, it's a very complicated and complex question. But I think we know that when you go through an era and there were two social classes called slave owners and enslaved, and then afterwards they don't exist as social categories, well, you've seen a revolutionary change. When that happens, however it happens, whether peacefully or non-peacefully or whatever it is, you've done the job that you need to do. And usually this happens when the old system can no longer function, when it breaks. People don't get up in the morning and overthrow social systems because they think it's a good idea, because it's too risky. I mean, you could get killed, or you could lose your job. It's like voting to go on strike or something. I lose my job. What if we lose? Most strikes are lost. It's a big risk. You got to be at a certain point in your life where I just can't go the other way. It can't proceed the other way. And answering James's question and my point about Jefferson County or Berkeley County, the culture here, the system here, under the pressure of this pandemic and everything, it is breaking. When the county commissioner sends out a note to you saying, don't shovel your driveway if you're over 65 because the hospitals are full right now. Okay, they're full right now, and people over 65 and shovel their driveway have heart attacks, and there won't be any room for you. So don't shovel your driveways. That was their Christmas message. And, so I think that the opportunities are there right in our community as it breaks. It will break. And because we're at that point. I think we're at a critical point. And when it does, then the alternatives, become more visible. And by the way, I was thinking we ought to, rechristen maybe this show an Appalachian Socialist League or something like that. But anyway, that's my thought. Anybody else?
Yeah. In regards to James' question, yeah. So here in Beaver County, as I've said before, we have the cracker plant, which is being built. So while it's being built, we have thousands of jobs. Once it's built, we won't have that many jobs. But what's really interesting is that one of my political colleagues, who is a union worker in a local plant, he ran for state representative, to be a state rep, and he lost. All of our people who ran as Dems for state representative lost because they're not in the shell, development stream. But what's really interesting is he came out of that race. So he's a real strong Medicare for All supporter, but what's really interesting is he came out of that race really convinced that he needs to do some sort of an economic project. And he's convinced that what he wants to try to do is get some commercial hemp going in our county, because one of the reasons he lost is because our gerrymander is so bad. So he has all this rural Republican district, like to keep his district Republican. So his idea is he needs to relate to those rural people. So he's determined that he's going to have, he wants to do it regionally as he's studied it. And so of course, like what he comes up against, which we come up against again and again and again and again, is access to capital. So like he's studying it, he's like talking to the right people, he's got all these plans, he's like looking into the industrial end of it, the farming end of it, like the comprehensive thing you'd have to do to have industrial hemp. But I feel like I know what's going to happen. It's like what's always happens is we can't get any freaking money to do anything that's productive. Although, like, I don't know. So on the other hand, there's also this reimagining Appalachia thing that is intent upon looking at how to get capital. But then, like, I also, when I go to those meetings, I look and there are the nonprofit people there. Like one of the big nonprofit streams in Beaver County right now is an organization that is promoting the only concrete policy they have on their site. They're all about like developing the riverfronts, is to promote not carbon tax, but carbon exchanges. So when I go to this Reimagining Appalachian meetings, I see that, like I kind of feel like I know what that's about. That's like the nonprofit industrial sector, like, siphoning off all these people that I know who want to go to these meetings. So I think James's question is, it always comes down to like how, and which is like the class struggle, is how do we get our hands on the capital, like to build what we need, which I know is just like this slow slog of developing consciousness and raising that question at every meeting I ever go to. So I don't know.
Anybody else?
Well, if you want to get, Scott raised his hand.
Go ahead, Scott. Go.
You're muted, Scott.
Don't forget your button there, Scott.
You were first, Carl. Go ahead.
Well, if, there's two sources. There's two ways you can get your hands on money. One is, first of all, to get any kind of political power, you need three things. You need organized good ideas, you need organized money, and you need organized voters. Organized good ideas and organized voters, we know how to do. And thanks to Bernie's work with PayPal, we now have some new ideas on how to get some organized money. So the point is, we have to, to get some money. The first place is to try to get it from the government, which means you have to win the seats. You have to win the elections. and take over those positions that can demand and can receive. The second way to get it is come up with good business plans, because there is sources of capital available, but you have to have a good business plan to get it. There's a whole sector growing in Wall Street of green finance capital right now that are looking for. There's not very many of them. They're not the majority by any stretch of the imagination, but there's enough of them with serious money, and they're betting on the fact that the green industrial sector is going to grow, and there's lots, and they will make money on it if they have something to invest in. So that means you have to come up with projects or infrastructure projects that are going to be green or assist green, and that are going to help create new wealth. That's the advantage of the things like Reimagine Beaver County, is that they have all kinds of ideas for decent things to do to invest money, and some will attract capital, some won't. But we have to be in there to be the left voice of it, the one that's going to advocate for, that's not for the nonprofit industrial complex, that's for the kind of advanced sector of manufacturing and green industry that's going to mean new employment, a new creation of wealth, and open to unionization. So we have to be the voice for that in those bodies. Just one last point about movements. We attach the term movement to just about everything: labor movement, women's movement, so on and so forth. I think there are movements, and they emerge when capitalists inflict certain outrages on us, and then movements grow up, like we saw this last summer, with all the killings of young black men, and young black women, and they created, those outrages. But what we have are campaigns, and I think the thing to look for are insurgencies. Which sectors are insurgent today, and that we have to put, like the movement around here is insurgent today, or the healthcare workers are very insurgent. The fast food workers in the Fight for 15 are insurgent. A lot of our regular working class are not. They've been trapped into petrochemical stuff. Now they have battles that they wage within that for their own health care and things like that, which we should support. And we should never lose touch with them, even if they're off on the wrong direction, economic wise and Trump wise. But we still have to maintain our connections with them, and continue to raise a different pole that can have some influence on their thinking.
Scott.
I found the button. I was thinking, Tina and Randy, one of the things that's going on that I think is really important is that there is, now Carl's got me confused. I don't know whether to call it a campaign or a movement, but anyway, there is a large, really interesting development in the steelworkers around co-ops. And I think a lot of you may have heard of the Mondragon co-ops that have, the steelworkers have affiliated with Mondragon, and they have actually created, out of some mills that were closing, they created co-ops and reopened the mills, particularly to make windmill blades for the windmills. And I'm thinking that it might be good for you guys to be in touch with the people. I mean, you've been deeply involved in the struggle there. And I think that there may be an avenue for some kind of co-op around some of the things that you're worried about, and in rural areas. And I think that the steelworkers might be able to help you with that, because I think that would be a way to do what you're talking about. And you think about the history of these kinds of things. There were banks set up as co-ops back in the 30s that what is it? The one in North Dakota still exists today, and it was one that didn't get hurt by the collapse in 2008 and all of those kinds of things. And I think that's an important avenue to take a look at in terms of what you're trying to do, kind of a concrete thing. That's it.
Hey, Mike, Randy, and
Yeah, I just want to say that that the government passed a stimulus bill, and part of it was supposed to go to help small businesses. So what happened was, that went to the major banks, and the major banks helped write that bill, and that money went to their main clients. Did go to small businesses.
Right.
I work for a small business. So, that my point is, how is capital being distributed? And my last point is, the largest money movement in the United States today is the increase in corporate debt, corporate borrowing, in order to raise incomes of the top and to buy back shares of their own stock. That's where the big money is moving right now. We might want to talk about that, in a week or two.
That creates money. It doesn't create wealth. Those kind of maneuvers. That's the point. You can make money, or you can create new wealth. There's two different sectors of capital.
I just wanted to make a little observation about one of the numbers that Ted put out there, which was, and it's true, I believe our governor is our only billionaire in West Virginia. I've heard that said. I can't verify it, but so that Dean's proposition.
I'm a dollar heir.
What'd you say? The Dean's proposition about you're gonna to do something about inequality. You're gonna take money from the rich. You got to grow, but you got to take money from the rich. It's not that practical in West Virginia, and but I notice around the world, for example, that I hear, for example, that it wouldn't be a good idea if your development path was to go down the petrochemical direction, and you got to keep in mind a lot of manufacturing where the wages are higher, for I believe sound Marxist reasons related to material values. Well, we had a big plant come into Jefferson County. Well, might be big, might be 200-300 people, and a tremendous campaign rose to stop it among most of the progressives.
We are up on 10 a.m., John.
Yeah, well, yeah. Thanks, Ben. And the wages starting in that plant were going to be about $3.50 an hour above the median wage in the county. And but people thought that the threat of pollution from manufacturing, I don't think it was ever entirely verified in this case, since I've looked all over the world, 25 different factories the company has, and never found a single incident. But nevertheless, okay, doesn't mean it couldn't happen. Anyway, that was more important than the 1850 starting wage. But see, in my book, it's not more important. The 1850 wage is more important. Unless you can prove it's going to kill somebody, the 1850 wage is more important than the $12 an hour they're paying the hemp workers in Jefferson County right now. So I'm just some of that stuff bothers me. I probably got poisoned from too many years in the labor movement, maybe, but you know, I that's a troubling matter for me. So if I was the governor of West Virginia, I would be a little bit like, you know, Hugo Chavez or whoever's, you know, some of these other countries where you don't have any money, so you have to go to foreign capital. I would talk to Mr. Zuckerberg about what he wanted to put into West Virginia. I would talk to all these guys, the government. Point is, I'm not going to sit. You can't take the position, in my opinion, that you're going to sit on your ass and wait until a miracle happens in the presidency, and you know, on white night, or even a black night, any night, you know, heads over the hill to save you. That's the problem. Anyway, that's my rant.
All right, John. Thank you.
All right, thanks, Mike. Anyway,
We are up on past 10 a.m. and I want to thank John Case, our original dusty-footed philosopher, for bringing Talking Socialism online from enlightenradio.org. And of course, John Christensen, nice to see you. Randy, nice to see you. Ed, Scott, Lawrence, I'm glad to see you out of your coffin. Carl Davidson, we appreciate everything. Thank you so much, and Happy New Year, everybody.
All right, thanks, Mike.
And let's make it a fighting New Year.
All right.
Fighting New Year. All right, man. All right, man. Solidarity forever. Here we go. Bye-bye.